You are back with the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles, Parkinson, and David Leitch. David, look, that was quite an interesting interview. I guess the two things that I took away from it was this sort of skepticism about onshore wind being able to deliver the capacity that's required to allow the orderly exit of coal-fired power stations. But I guess the question is, can offshore wind do it in that time frame and at that capacity? And I did find it interesting, his comments about when offshore wind will blow. I guess if that is true, then that's useful.
Yes, but of course, some onshore wind farms are also non-seasonal, and I've often mentioned that in Queensland, if they were ever allowed to build any more wind and strengthen the links to the southern states, that also is counter-seasonal. So there's no doubt that building a portfolio is the right approach. Look, I thought that Charles was very helpful in describing the reality, I think, as it is today. But listeners, gone.
No, I say, well, he didn't try to gild the lily, but he's still quite insistent that offshore wind must and can still have a role. But
Yes.
and making the point that there's no point just building one of these things, otherwise that's not really going to happen. It has to be in bulk.
Certainly, to get the cost down, it has to be in bulk. Look, I can't say more water is going to flow under the bridge, but it's certainly going to flow through Bass Strait as this progresses. And so we'll get
David, you just have said that.
So we'll get an opportunity to come back, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to congratulate Dan Tehan on becoming on his forthcoming appointment as the opposition shadow treasurer. Now, some listeners may find that surprising, but I just want to point out that the well-worn pathway for the opposition is that you become the Minister of Energy, generally stuff that up and achieve nothing, and then you go on to be appointed either treasurer or shadow treasurer. So this happened. Can you run me through? I think we've had Josh Frydenberg, Angus Taylor, Ted O'Brien have all followed this path so far. So can Dan Tehan be far behind?
Well, let's hope he's better at numbers than Ted O'Brien. How Ted gets into the economy portfolio, sort of balancing budgets and things like that after his performance with nuclear and the numbers that he produced there, then or failed to produce, big as the mine. But yeah, look, interesting stuff.
And while we're on politics, Giles, there are two other big political events this week. One, I suppose the easiest to talk about and dismiss is the Queensland government, which has already gone back, as far as I can see, on quite a number of commitments outside the sphere of this podcast, but it's like Olympic stadiums and light rail extensions and so on, and they've
Environmental Defender's Office. We're not going to scrap that. Oh, we just scrapped it.
That's right. So and now we have this sort of seeming very negative attitude towards renewable energy development in Queensland, and I think what struck me most about it is how primitive the system is in Queensland, where all the power resides with the minister. And how grateful I am that to be in New South Wales, which has a proper system for actually determining these things and appealing from them and having them decided on their merits.
Yes, and of course, you're talking about the Moonlight Range wind project, which actually got approved by the Queensland authorities late last year, and was all set to go. It got called in, and now it's been cancelled. And I guess what disturbed me most was the triumphalism of the minister, who was sort of boasting about it and had a big picture of a wind farm and a cancelled sticker on it on his Facebook page, and he seemed to be absolutely delighted by that. And look, if he's got good reasons to put it in, all very well, but to be so triumphant about it, we stopped this, hooray! I just thought it was just such a bad, it's a bad signal. But a question mark about whether it is as bad or for the Northwest Shelf, the approval there, Murray Watt has come in as the new environment minister. I mean, he's the archetypal Labor political operative, basically, out there set to do a task, which he's done. And I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, he can justify it in a number of ways. Everybody else is horrified, frustrated that the EPBC Act doesn't even consider emissions and climate change, in its considerations. But despite all that, he's given the head. And the gas industry is equally triumphant, and I just sort of feel that we've made a lot of step backwards in the last couple of weeks.
So I think the Climate Change Authority pointed out, as we all know, that the gas and coal that we export is responsible for about 2% of global emissions, which is, a meaningful number in the total, and that in the end, if you want to have a COP here in Australia, it has to go beyond our domestic ambitions. You have to show that we have some international ambition as well. This is in a week where we've seen a glacier collapse in Switzerland, wiping out an entire village, and you can read on.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? The visual of that is just stunning.
Where it's in a year where we've had terrible bushfires in America, in Los Angeles, and you've now got the oil sands industry, a major climate polluter, and it's in Canada, which runs into bushfire season. We've had floods and cyclones in Australia. I think that the Insurance Council has pointed out that there is something like 250,000 houses in flood-prone areas in Australia, about a quarter of which at least, or even more, just simply cannot get insurance, are uninsurable now. And we all know the reality that the scale and the frequency of these disasters and incidents is going to increase. And I think the whole population is quite sensitive at the moment, and it's drought in South Australia, to weather. And we all think more and more about, is this just another weather event, or is it being partly driven, at least, by climate change? And yes, Australia is doing well domestically with policies. And we have often said, and I continue to congratulate Chris Bowen on what he's done, but it doesn't go far enough, really. And when Anthony Albanese talks about net zero, that is a weasel word. Net zero is not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for zero. Net zero might have some meaning if there were actually policies to take carbon out of the atmosphere or something, but there are no such policies.
Well, there's not even technology.
Technologies, I mean.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. No, I was quite sort of appalled by Albanese just sort of saying, well, it's not zero, is it? It's not zero, it's net zero. And it's just like, oh, God, has this guy learned nothing? Does he believe in anything? It was interesting, actually, this week, Matt Keane, or just last week, announced the birth of his, of young Zoe. Congratulations, Matt. And he put a really nice post up on social media, just sort of saying, just a reminder of the importance of tackling climate change, etc., for the next generation. So you'd have to figure
not
that
just the next generation, Giles. We're talking many generations, and that really, we are stewards. And look, I went to see a musical concert. Why should we talk about music on this podcast when I can't even pronounce the name of the artist that well? And I'm Anohni, thanks. And I had to be dragged along to that by my wife because I don't normally like listening to singers because the music's too slow. I like a bit of Lou Reed and hard rock and roll, if anyone's keeping attention. But this concert was made. It was a very unusual performance piece, and a video was made of the ongoing destruction of the Great Barrier Reef by climate change and the coral bleaching episodes. And it was very moving to see some of Australia's foremost scientists virtually in tears at the way that the reef and all its natural beauty is basically, no one gives a rat's, No one gives a rat's about all these houses that are going to be without insurance in flood-prone areas. In the end, vested interests and it doesn't, what can I do sort of attitude seems to still pervade the atmosphere. And so I found this performance profound, and it made me think. I've been to the Barrier Reef a couple of times in the last 5 or 6 years, but I hope my descendants get that there as often as they can, because it's obviously fairly wonderful. But it's as I keep saying, I don't want to be too alarmist and disaster level, but I mean there are a lot of problems from climate change, and we really need to crack on.
Absolutely. Well, I'm actually going up to the Barrier Reef in a week's time. So hopefully there's something left to see, particularly at the place that we're booked to go to. My son also saw that very same concert that you saw, David, Anohni and the Johnsons, forming Anthony and the Johnsons, stunningly beautiful voice. And I wish I was there to see the whole concert and the whole video and that commentary from the climate scientists. David, there's a couple other things. The VIC transmission, look, I guess they're kind of related. The sort of VIC transmission study, and also the AEMO discussion on its transmission options. What was really interesting about that, I mean, as far as I could work out, it was the first formal recognition. I think there's been some sort of acknowledgement. It was the first formal recognition that transmission costs are getting away from us, jumping 50%. And there was this sort of, acknowledgement that they do have to focus on distributed energy and local networks, as Ausgrid's Mark England described on this podcast a month or so ago, and on consumer energy resources, which I think is a bit of a no-brainer, but everyone's kind of struggling to work out how that is, because it kind of involves a lot of other things like business models and other regulation and things like that. So we could actually see quite a change of focus in the integrated system plan. It's going to be quite fascinating to see what is actually produced at the end of the year.
Well, yes, and there's no doubt. I see it as an additionality, not an abandonment myself. There's still a lot of.
No, that's what I want to make that point as well. That this is a pretty good document, and all good documents can be adapted and modified. Other people are more critical, but I think it's a reasonably good
You're
plan.
not talking about Breast Mountain, are you?
I could possibly be, but that's okay. People allowed to have their opinion, and that's absolutely fine. And yes. So but changes will be made, and there'll be a change of focus, and I think it'll be welcome.
Yes, but I wouldn't want it to stop the major five myself. Anyway, that'll be debated. We'll have more chances to talk about that. The other thing I think we have to talk about this week is the fact that the default market offer prices have gone up and up to 9 or 10%. And although that only directly affects less than 10% of residential households.
Not according to the ABC. They said it's more than half of households, which is complete nonsense, but that's what they said.
And about 18% of small business. Nevertheless, it does set a reference from which these famous discounts that retailers offer. It makes me smile going forward. And it does point to the enduring issue that policymakers and everyone has to deal with, that it's very hard. If we're increasing the renewable energy share every year and electricity prices go up every year, the two are going to get linked in the public's mind. And so that link does have to be broken somewhere along the line somehow. And the point I hope most happens is that we continue to get enough competition. The great virtue of behind the meter solar is it is basically not controlled at the moment and won't be. And my worry is that if we have all these household batteries being part of VPPs, then basically we want as many players in the market as possible. Sorry, big gentailers, but we really do, because that is the way that we will end up with the most economic price.
It just makes me think actually about with that battery rebate scheme. I know the batteries have to be sort of VPP capable, but do they have to be actually connected to the VPP? I don't know if you think they can. No,
they don't.
That's right.
They don't.
Yes.
I'm just. But people always want to control stuff, right? No sooner if a battery is VPP capable, then AEMO will want it to be part of a VPP. Because it's just natural that people want to control stuff. And
orchestration.
Yes, orchestration. The conductor, the fat conductor.
Oh, anyway, look, we might have had too much fun today, David. We might have to wind this up pretty soon. I'm going to. Thank you very much for Giles Rattray for coming onto the podcast. Fascinating interview about Star of the South project. Thanks to our sponsors, Pylon and Evergen. Thanks to you, David. Thanks to all the listeners. And do check out some of our other podcasts. We actually got a really good interview on the Switched On podcast with Anohni about the people who led the Parents for Climate Challenge Against Energy Australia, which forced Energy Australia to admit that offsets were worthless and not offsetting the damage caused by its coal-fired power generation, which is actually quite a landmark thing, don't you think?
Yes, and I also just quickly want to mention in regard to Evergen that I've been a customer of for a long time, and I do hear comments that people say that solar panels on their own, even though they've got a payback, don't seem to change electricity bills a lot. And I have a little bit of sympathy for that view, because it wasn't until I put the household battery in and and without having to be part of any VPP, but just let Evergen sort of determine when it charges and doesn't charge, that's when my electricity bills drop like crazy. I think myself that household batteries are going to have a bigger impact on households that can afford them bills than people actually realise. But that's just based on my own experience.
And hopefully there will be, to some extent, a flow-on benefit to people who don't have batteries, because there'll be reduced demand at peaks and things like that, and that should modify, at least in principle. David, help me.
I think it's time to end this podcast.
We'll be back with another podcast. And look, I was talking about Switched On, and great interview about Energy Australia, also Solar Insiders. A really good interview with Ryan Wavish from NG, talking about solar tax in South Australia. Reverse, people are being paid not to put solar into the grid, which may not be an issue once they've all got a battery. But anyway, it's a really interesting interview. So we'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast in about a week's time. Bye for now.